1.
You want to do a little test so the speakers aren't on yet, but I'm going to turn them on. It blows up. It might blow up. You're live.
1.
Test, test.
Test.
Yeah, get that mic a little closer to you there. And then, so you may have to just kind of squeeze it to you.
Test. But it doesn't work.
Yeah, you can't hear yourself because you're behind it, and if you come in front of it,
Yeah?
you can't
Ah,
feedback.
okay.
So
Okay. Here.
trust me. You're good.
Okay.
Jerusalem. Thank you for sharing your faith and your knowledge of the Bible.
Eric, you need to turn it off. Is it good? Is it okay? All right. So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Eric, for your introduction. This trip was planned 4 years ago, and then there was a global pandemic and a war and another war, and I had 3 children. It was really complicated to make it happen, but thank God I'm here. And I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for having me. It is a long journey to fly from Israel to Texas. It took me more than 15 hours to get here, but I'm telling you, it was really important for me to come because I came with a message that comes from my heart, a message which is important for me, that changed the way I read the Bible, and that's why it's really important for me to spread the message and to share it with friends, new friends, and familiar friends as well. And this is a message that was developed throughout my years as a tour guide in the land of the Bible, guiding in biblical sites, and also as someone who is reading the Bible in the land of the Bible. So this is kind of the background for the message I'm about to share with you tonight. If you're sitting in this room, you probably want to understand the Bible better. We have people here from different walks of life, different denominations, different traditions, but I assume that all of us want to understand the Bible better. That's why you came here. And if you want to understand, and the reason you want to understand the Bible is very simple one, because you care about the Bible. And if you care about someone or something, you just want to understand it better. Now, it is true that Jews and Christians, they read the Bible differently. There are different glasses when they read the Bible. But what I would like to do tonight is to offer a point of view that can be relevant for Christians and Jews. And if you're not familiar with this statue, this is from a Catholic university in the States, in the United States, and it's basically a takeoff on a European medieval statue where you have 2 ladies, one representing Judaism, like the synagogue, the other one represents the church, and the Jewish lady is like blind, she's old, she's ugly, while the Christian one is like pretty and brave. And this is a takeoff where you can see both of them learning together and sharing their wisdom with one another. So it's beautiful, and that's basically what I would like to do tonight, to take a look at a layer of the Bible that can be relevant for both Christians and Jews before we go to theology. So there is a more fundamental layer that I would like to look at tonight. So without further ado, let's begin with my central claim. So my central claim for tonight is that geography matters. All right? That's what I would like to look at tonight. That's what I would like to elaborate tonight. And by geography, I don't only mean like classic geography, which is what usually people think of when I say geography. So it's not only maps and mountains and valleys and rivers. It's also classic geography, but it's also economical geography and historical geography and cultural geography. Basically every aspect of the land and how it been shaped and has shaped by the human experience. All right? So every aspect of the land and its relationship with humans can be considered as geography. Now, why does it matter? It matters because in the Bible, geography is a character, and people often kind of miss it or overlook it because they don't get it. They don't get the geography because they read it outside of the lens of the Bible, and so they miss the geography. But it's an important one. I mean, we all understand the importance of history, right? We understand that it is important that Abraham came before David, who came before Jesus, right? And we know it's important to say that Jesus was born 2,000 years ago, right? But what about geography? So, for example, Bethlehem. right? Why it is important that Jesus was born in Bethlehem? Okay, so we have the fulfillment of a prophecy from the Hebrew Bible. That's great. But in addition to it, where is Bethlehem? What's the climate like in Bethlehem? What Bethlehem means, all right? So these are questions I would like to look at tonight. Or, we often reflect on names of people in the Bible. Like a classic one would be Peter, right? Peter is the rock. Or Isaac. Do you know what Isaac means in Hebrew? So Isaac means to laugh, because Sarah laughed when she was announced that she's going to give birth. All right, so these are classic ones, so people know it, people understand the importance of names of people in the Bible. But wait a second, what about names of places in the Bible? Does it matter? Is it important? What Bethlehem means? Capernaum? All right, no. In the translations of the Bible, names of places were kept in Hebrew, right? So Jerusalem, Shiloh, Hebron, Bethlehem, Nazareth, whatever. So the names were kept. But when you get out of Hebrew, you miss the meaning of the name. And believe it or not, but the names of the places are not just weird names, but they have a meaning. All right? So these are things I would like to look at tonight. So what we're going to do is I chose 4 case studies, just 4. And in the next, half an hour or so, we're going to demonstrate through those 4 case studies how geography plays a role in the biblical text. So let's get started. And my first one is going to be climate and faith, how climate shaped the theology and the mindset of ancient Israel. So in order to do so, first of all, let's get to know the map of Israel. And very briefly, I will just share with you that Israel is in Asia, not in Europe. And Israel, it is very customary to divide Israel into 3 geographical strips. The first one would be the coastal plain, and it is a flat area. It's not hilly, with one exception, which is Mount Carmel, right here. And then you have the central hill country, and those who've been to Israel, they know that the central hill country is hilly, right? And this is where most of the Bible took place. So both Old and New Testament, both of the books, they talk about the central hill country. So Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, Nazareth, Hebron, all right, Shiloh, all of those places are part of the central hill country. And then the third strip we have is the Jordan River Valley, which has the Sea of Galilee, has the Jordan River, the Dead Sea. And another name for it would be the Syrian-African Rift, because it's a rift that starts in Syria and ends up in Egypt. Now, speaking of Syria and Egypt, something which is very important to understand about the geography of the land of Israel is the fact that Israel is a land bridge connecting Syria and Egypt. Now, Syria and Egypt are very important because they're kind of the cradles of civilization. Alphabet and cultures and cities were developed more or less at the same time in Syria and in Egypt, along the Nile, along the Euphrates and the Tigris. And the only way to get from one spot to another is through the land of Israel. Why is that? Because Mediterranean Sea and impassable desert. All right, you have the big Arabian desert, which is Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, all of these, and you can't cross it. It's a dry, arid desert. So the only way to cross from one civilization to another is through a narrow land bridge called the land of Israel. Now, one more aspect of climate and geography that I want to look at is the fact that the land of Israel is located between 2 of the world's largest deserts. All right, so pay attention. On the south, we have the Sahara Desert, North Africa, or Africa, not just North. And then we have on the east, the Arabian Desert, which again is Saudi Arabia of today, and the Emirates, and Qatar, all of these places over there. And pay attention that in between, we have the land of Israel. It has a huge impact. The fact that Israel is being squeezed by 2 deserts has a huge impact on the climate of the land of Israel. Because on one hand, Israel gets the kind of the dry climate of the desert, but on the other hand, from the Mediterranean, we get the more moist, humid climate from Europe. And Israel is kind of stuck in between, all right? So it's a semi-arid climate, and some parts of the land are actually, they feel they are a desert. The southern part of the country, the Negev, is a desert. The eastern parts of the country they feel like a desert because basically they're extensions of the Sahara and the Arabian desert. In addition, what Israel lacks, we lack a lot of things, but one thing that we lack is a big, good river. All right, because in Egypt we have the Nile, in Syria we have the Tigris and Euphrates. In Israel we do not have a good, predictable river. True, there is the Jordan River, but first of all, it's not very big. And in addition, it runs along the Jordan River Valley, while most of the ancient Israelites, they lived, as I just shared with you, on top of the hill country in places like Jerusalem and Hebron and Bethlehem. And even in the Holy Land, water doesn't run up, all right? So most of the people did not live next to a river. And of course, this is a very different experience than the Israelites had in Egypt. Because in Egypt, it's very easy, right? Agriculture is very easy, very, very, very classic, very, very easy. You have a river, predictable river. You know how to work with it. You can channel out the water and put it, just irrigate your field. You know you're going to get water. It's predictable. You'll always have water. Not a big deal, right? While in the land of Israel, most of the rain comes from heaven, all right? Now, think about the differences in the experience between living along a river and trusting God to provide you with water, all right? And we can see this difference system in a very important chapter in Deuteronomy. So in Deuteronomy 11, it says that the land you're entering to take is not like the land of Egypt, but the land you're crossing to the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven, all right? So the land of Israel drinks rain from heaven. But wait a second. It is a bit more complicated because look at the following verse. So the following verse says, wait a second, it's like a condition, all right? It's a contract, but there is a condition. If you obey my commandments, then I will send rain on your land in its season, all right? So the land of Israel drinks from heaven, but there is a condition, all right? You need to obey my commandments. So the Bible sees rain as a divine reaction to human behavior. If you'll do this and that, you'll get rain. If not, you won't. By the way, pay attention to the sentence, in its season. Because if you get early rain, you know what's going to happen? It will wash away the seeds. All right? Late rain, definitely not good. So you need to be very specific. You need to get rain in its season, otherwise it's not going to work. Now, friends, everything I just described about rain and about how you drink from heaven and you need God to provide rain, made the ancient Israelites to be very vulnerable to worship other gods. Why? Because let's just, imagine the Israelites coming in and they realize that unlike Egypt, they need rain, right? They need rain in order to have agriculture and food. And then their neighbors, their Canaanite neighbors, are telling them, yes, there is a deity who is responsible for rain. And the name of the deity is Baal. Baal is the Canaanite storm god, and he's the one who is responsible for rain. And the ancient Israelites are like, but, God and Moses and the prophets, they told us that God of Israel, God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he's the one who is responsible for rain. But, maybe as an insurance policy, we should worship Baal as well. Not instead of, but with the God of Israel. But the God of Israel doesn't want his followers to worship other gods, right? And we see it through the Bible. By the way, we know from the Bible and from archaeology that Baal was very popular. You're looking at a statue which was found in an archaeological excavation in an Israelite site, not a Canaanite site, right? And those statues were found in many, many Israelite sites, which is an indication that he was a popular deity among the Israelites. But again, as I said, God of Israel doesn't want his followers to worship other gods. And we see it throughout the Bible. A very famous story is the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, right? Elijah is challenging the prophets of Baal to compete over what? Over rain, right? There is a drought years, few drought years, and Elijah is challenging the prophets of Baal to see who is the one who's going to get rain. And to make a long story short, at the end of the story, when Elijah wins the competition, there is what? There's rain. All right, they're looking towards the Mediterranean, and there is rain. All right, so rain, the clouds are coming in, and this is the end of the drought. And the deep message of the story, it's a wonderful story, but the deep message of it is that there is only one entity who is responsible for rain, right? Not Baal, but the God of Israel is the one who provides rain. And I think it's an interesting window when we understand the background of things. It's a beautiful window to the mindset and to the understanding, to the deeper understanding of the story in 1 Kings 18. Another aspect that is important to understand about climate and the land of Israel is that from time to time there is a process called desertification. So the land of Israel, or the desert, penetrates into the country. So the desert takes over the country, and there are two expressions or two aspects of what I just said. One is that when you don't have a lot of trees, because people are cutting up the trees, or the government do not plant trees, so the temperature goes up and it gets really hot, and the desert gets into the country. And the other thing is that when the central administration, the central government is weak and do not keep the borders, you have desert tribes getting into the country with their flocks, and they destroy the fields. All right? And this is something which is not only biblical story, but it happens in modern days as well. So take a look at what Mark Twain said when he came to the Holy Land in 1860s. He describes a desert. Now, those who've been to Israel, they know that not all of Israel is a desert, right? The Galilee is lush, right? The center of the country is not a desert. Jerusalem is not a desert. But when Mark Twain came to the country, everything was desert. There is a reason for that. Because in the 1816, the Ottoman Empire was very weak, very corrupted, and so the central government was very weak. Bedouin tribes got from the deserts into the country, destroyed the fields because of the camels, because of the goats, the sheep, and that's what happened. All right, this is the outcome. So we can see kind of a window to how Israel looked like in the 1860s, and this is exactly the description of desertification, when the desert takes over the country. And the idea of the conflict between the desert and the more fertile lands is so rooted in the Bible that you can actually see it already in the beginning of Genesis. The story of Cain and Abel. All right, what is Cain and Abel? It's a story of a conflict between a shepherd and a farmer. All right, and again, this is the conflict, the clash that you'll see in Israel between the desert, between the arid, dry climate of the desert, and the more humid climate from the Mediterranean. And the battle site is the land of Israel. All right, so you have the two forces clashing in the land of Israel. Another interesting story that describes exactly what I was saying is in Judges 6, which is a story of Gideon. So just before Gideon, there is Deborah and Barak. And Deborah and Barak defeated the last king of the Canaanites. Now, on one hand, it's great, but it actually creates a problem. Why? Because now, when there is no Canaanite king, it allows tribes from the desert to penetrate into the country, right? Because there is a gap. So Deborah destroyed the last king of the Canaanites, but the Israelite monarchy hasn't been established yet, so there's a few years gap, and in between the country is kind of, open. The country is empty. There is no political establishment to keep the borders. And we read it in Judges 6 that 3 different tribes, Amalek from Sinai, Midian from Jordan, and the sons of the east, which is Syria of today, which is the upper part of the Arabian desert, they penetrate to the country. And what do? They bring their camels and sheep and goats into the country to destroy the fields. So in other words, in order to defeat the ancient Israelites, you don't need a sword. You just need the mouth of the camel and the sheep and the goats. All right? And this is a destruction. It means death to the ancient people of Israel. And this is the background to the rise of Gideon. So they call Gideon, help us and save us, not from the armies, but from the camels and sheep and goats of the desert tribes. You can see how they come from different directions with their flocks to destroy the fields. So friends, in order to wrap up our first case study, you can see that the geography and the climate of Israel are not just background details, they are theological forces. And the Bible talks again and again about obedience, about rain, about fertility, and it grows directly out of the geographic reality. And the most important sentence I would like to share with you tonight is that to live in Israel was and is to live on the edge. Right? Physically, because you live on the edge of the desert, and spiritually, because of the challenges you are going through. Let's take a look at the next one. So the next case study I would like to share with you is from the book of the Psalms of David, chapter 125. So in the book of Psalms, we have this sentence, this verse that I bet most of you are familiar with. And it says that as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people both now and forever. And it's very poetic, and it's very comforting, and it's beautiful, but there is one problem. What is it? It's not true. Jerusalem is not surrounded by mountains. Well, at least not today. It wasn't during the time of the Crusaders or the Ottomans or the Romans or the Byzantine. It wasn't during the time of Jesus. It was not surrounded by mountains during the time of Solomon, Hezekiah. But there was a very specific time in history that Jerusalem was surrounded by mountains. And if we will be able to trace this period of time when Jerusalem was surrounded by mountains, we will be able to date the verse from the book of Psalms. All right, so let's take a look at the topography of Jerusalem. This is very special because, it's those who've been to Jerusalem, you know that Jerusalem is very built up. 5,000 years of history, you cannot see the topography of Jerusalem. It is concealed by layers and layers of buildings, so it's hard to recognize the topography of Jerusalem. So this slide and also the next one are actually very important because it allows us to see the topography of Jerusalem, and then things will be clear, don't worry. So take a look at the topography of Jerusalem, and there are a few things I would like you to pay attention to. So basically we can say that ancient Jerusalem has 2 ridges. That's it. This one, let's call it the eastern ridge, and this is the western ridge. All right? Throughout history, this is where Jerusalem was this is where Jerusalem was built on. In addition, we have Mount of Olives. I don't include it as part of Jerusalem because it was always outside the outskirts, the cemetery of Jerusalem. It always served as the eastern boundary of Jerusalem. Jerusalem never expanded towards Mount of Olives because on the other side of it there is the desert, the Judean desert. All right? But basically, those 2 ridges are the ancient Jerusalem. What you see, the black line, this is the old city of today. Now, in between the ridges, we have valleys. This one called the Kidron Valley. This one is the Central Valley. And over here, we have the Hinnom Valleys. All right? So these are kind of the 3 valleys that you'll find in ancient Jerusalem. Now, let's take a look at after we understood the topography, let's take a look at Jerusalem at the time of the Hebrew Bible, time of the First Temple, or the professional definition would be the Iron Age. Let's take a look at Jerusalem at the Iron Age. So archaeologists were able to describe the urban development of Jerusalem during the Iron Age. And they did it after 1967. So if this lecture would have taken place in 1965, I wouldn't be able to tell you what I'm going to tell you now, because everything I'm going to tell you now was discussed discovered after 1967 when Israeli archaeologists came into the area of the Old City, excavated, and they were able to date the development of the urban development of Jerusalem. And they divided it into 3 phases, right? So apparently Jerusalem at the time of the first temple of the Hebrew Bible had 3 phases of development. The first one is the area known as the City of David. This is the Canaanite city, right? So before David conquered the city, it was controlled by a tribe known as the Jebusites, and it was built over there because there is a spring here. All right? So the city was built around the spring. This is the city that David knew. All right? So when you read about David and Jerusalem, David, his palace, the conquest of Jerusalem, all of that, this is where it took place, right here. His son, Solomon, expanded the city and built 2 things. First of all, he built the temple on top of the ridge on a mountain called Mount Moriah. And in addition, in between City of David and Mount Moriah, right here, he built kind of a governmental area with chambers and offices and warehouses and rooms. Everything was excavated, not a temple. The temple, it's impossible to excavate because of politics, but this area right here was excavated recently, like 10 years ago. All right? So this is an expansion of Solomon. In addition, in the 8th century BC, so 150 years more or less after the time of David and Solomon, the city expanded again, this time towards the western hill. Remember the 2 hills, the eastern ridge, the western ridge? All right, so this is the western ridge, and there was an expansion because the kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. Many refugees fled from the north, came to Jerusalem, and built their buildings on the western hill, the western ridge. Now pay attention, friends. If I'm standing here, all right, Jerusalem is not surrounded by mountains because I'm looking towards the east, and the eastern ridge is lower, right? And those who've been to Jerusalem, and you remember the staircase that goes down to the western wall, that's exactly what I'm talking about, all right? So you walk down to the western wall, which means if you were standing in the Jewish quarter of today, all right, I'll just translate it to modern days, you're looking down when you're looking towards the Temple Mount, City of David, all of that, all right? But even if you are standing here, if someone stands in the area of Mount Moriah and he looks towards the south, what does he see? He sees a slope, a downhill. Jerusalem is not surrounded by mountains. But there was a time that Jerusalem was surrounded by mountains. That Jerusalem was the lowest area. And that's during the time of King David. All right? And this is an image, a description, an illustration that shows us how Jerusalem looked like in the time of King David. You can see it is even before the construction of the temple, because you see that on top of Mount Moriah, there is what? There is a threshing floor. All right? Because before the temple was built, there was a threshing floor. And maybe remember that when Jesus came to the river, to Jordan River, and he saw John the Baptist told him, you're going to cleanse the threshing floor. You're going to cleanse the temple. All right? Because before the temple was built by Solomon, there was a threshing floor purchased by King David, and Solomon built a temple on it. But this is how Jerusalem looked like. This is the city of David. All right? And if you're standing at the city of David, everything around you is higher. So Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. So just to wrap it up, when we understand the topography and archaeology of Jerusalem, it allows us to date the Bible, to affirm the Bible, and to understand the biblical tradition, because you know the biblical tradition is that King David is the one who wrote Psalms. And now I can tell you that archaeology and topography, they confirm that, you know what, at least it was written during the time of King David, maybe not by King David himself, but at least during his reign, because this was the only time that Jerusalem was surrounded by mountains. Let's move on to the third case study. So the third case study I would like to talk about is the strategic significance of the Ebenezer battle. So in 1 Samuel chapter 4, we have the story of a war that takes place between the Israelites and the Philistines, and it says that the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek. So this is a very important war, and it marks kind of a very important shift in Israel's history because of two reasons. First of all, it is the first time, I wouldn't say the first time, but one of the first times that Israelites are going against the Philistines and not vice versa. Right? So they're the one who started the war, the Israelites, but also the location of the conflict, the location of the war is very, very significant, and I want to explain. I would like to explain it now. So what you're looking at is the two places we just mentioned. All right, so Ebenezer and Afek, here they are. This is how it looks like today. So on the left, you can see ruins. It's a small hill today in the center of Israel, not too far from the airport, not too far from Tel Aviv. And you have ruins over there, and the ruins were identified by archaeologists and by geographers as the site of Ebenezer. A very interesting site, not very familiar. It's free, there's nothing there, just go there, it's always open, it's a hill, and you can see the ruins of the site of Ebenezer. On the right side, you can see Afek, where the Philistines camped, and what you're looking at is an Ottoman fortress, but below it, and you can see it, you can see the ruins from the time of the Bible. You see it? So the Ottoman site was built on top of the ruins from the time of the Bible. You can see there is a lake here. Remember this lake, it's a beginning, it's the source of a river that I will talk about in a few minutes. All right, so these are kind of the two places. Now, as I said, this is not a random location. It is a very strategic location. Let's understand why. So let's take a look at this map, and this map shows you theory. All right, it's the theory that has never been fulfilled. This is the promised land according to Joshua. So when the Israelites entered the country, Joshua divided the country among the different tribes. But we know it from Bible and from archaeology that this map was never fulfilled. Right? Because according to the map, according to Joshua, the tribes of Judah, Dan, Manasseh, and Asher were supposed to control Israel's coastline. You see it? But in practice, what happened is that the coastline of the land of Israel was controlled by Philistines on the south and the north by the Phoenicians. Right? So basically from Gaza to Jaffa, more or less, this was all controlled by the Philistines. North of it was controlled by the Phoenicians. You see, it says here, just north of Jaffa, it says Tel Kasila. Tel Kasila is an archaeological site. I grew up 5 minutes away, and as a kid, we would go there and learn about the Philistines. And it's a Philistine city, it's a Philistine town, all right, just north of Jaffa. And this is just an indication to show you that the coastline was controlled by the Philistines. So after everything I said, we can understand what's the importance of the battle. Take a look at the map. And you can see on the map that the battle site took place on the borderline between the two regions, between the Philistine coastline and the Israelite hill country. It is the first time that the Israelites are not just defending the hill country, but are having an offensive attack towards the coast. They are trying to take possess of the coast. But it's actually deeper than that, because it's not just a random location somewhere along the coast. It is the most important location along the Israeli coastline. Why? I already mentioned the fact that the land of Israel is a land bridge, right? And actually there's a specific highway that runs from Egypt to Syria. It's called the Via Maris, the Way of the Sea. That's the name of the highway. And ironically, it's called the Way of the Sea, but most of it doesn't run along the coast. All right? And you can see it right here. All right? The reason it doesn't run along the coast is because of this. There's a river. It's called the Yarkon. Today it's part of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is divided by the Yarkon. North city, south city, divided by the Yarkon River. The Yarkon River starts in Afek. All right, remember the lake next by the Ottoman fortress? All right, so it starts right here. And this is the Yarkon. And today, Yarkon is small. And the reason it's so small today is because the Brits built pumping stations to pump the water from the Yarkon and to bring it up to Jerusalem. And it works until today. right? So today, people of Jerusalem, when they open the tap, they get the water from the Yarkon, and it's a system which was built by the Brits, by the British Empire. Now, in ancient days, but until the 20th century, it was a river that people had to cross, and especially in the winter, you see the flooding areas, so it was very muddy and swampy, and people wanted to avoid it. So they had to go around it and to go all the way to Afek. But here it gets a bit complicated, because a few miles away, east of Afek, this is the beginning of the hill country, specifically Samaria, which means you have a very, very narrow area to cross through. Because on the right, on the east, you have the hill country, and it's not convenient, right, to climb up. On the west, you have the river, and then you have a bottleneck that you have to cross through. And this is the location which was chosen by the Israelites as the battle site to fight against the Philistines. It's a place that will allow them to tax people. It's a place that will allow them to block the Philistines from climbing up. It's a place that will allow them to conduct more military campaigns in the future. So it's a very strategic location. So when we read the Bible and we read that they camped at a place called Ebenezer and they camped in a place that called Afek, it sounds like just names of places. But in practice, only when we look at the map and we understand that there is a river over there and there is a bottleneck over there, we understand the significance of the location. Let's take a look at what happened when the war started. So,
how wide is that bottleneck?
2.5 kilometers, which in miles is, Eric, help us. Yeah? So it's very narrow. So let's take a look at what happened. So the Bible usually do not talk a lot, it doesn't describe wars, right? It says that there is a war, but it doesn't get into the military operation, so we don't really know what happened over there, but we know the end. And the end is that the Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated, right? So Israelites wanted to, move down towards the coastline, but they were defeated, and 4,000 people were killed. And when the soldiers returned to the camp, they came to the elders of Israel, and they asked the elders of Israel, what happened? Right? Why the Lord is not helping us? And the elders of Israel did not say, well, you should repent, or the elders of Israel did not say, maybe change the strategy of the forces. No, what they suggested is to bring the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh. All right? So this was their suggestion, but guess what? It didn't work out. All right? So the people sent men to Shiloh. They brought back the Ark. And when Israel saw the ark, they raised such a great shout that the ground shook. Right? So there was an excitement because now we have the weapon, we have the ark, and the ark will help us. But guess what? It didn't work out because the Philistines were afraid. But this fear actually helped them because they were prepared and they took the fight very seriously. They took the war very seriously, and they defeated Israel. And the slaughter was very great. Pay attention that the Bible is using, also in Hebrew, using the same word, because there was such a great shout, and then there was such a great slaughter. All right? So it kind of puts together their excitement and the outcome of the war. So there was a slaughter, and they were defeated. And take a look what happened. So there was a slaughter. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The Ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died at the war. Let's focus on the Ark. Let's see what happened to the Ark. So they took the Ark from Ebenezer, from the site where Israel camped, and they took it to the Philistine area, and they put it in the temple of Dagon. Dagon is a deity, one of the most popular deities of the Philistines. The name Dagon comes from the Hebrew word Dagan, which means grain, like cereals. There is a reason for that, because the area of the Philistines, the southern part of Israel's coastline, is the breadbasket of Israel until today. Right? Around the Gaza Strip, that's kind of the area which Israel has most of its fields. And so Dagan is the Hebrew word for grain. Dagon is the god who is responsible, the deity who is responsible for grain. Anyway, so the Philistines put the ark in Dagon's temple, but what happened is that he was falling on his face, and then they put him up, and the following day, again, he fell over, but this time his head and hands had been broken off, and they were lying on the threshold of the temple. Why this is so dramatic and so crucial for the Philistines? Because we need to understand the mentality and the culture of the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near East, and we know it from the Bible, we know it from books and episodes of other cultures around Israel, that cutting off legs and heads, like beheading people, was the ultimate humiliation. You all know the story of David and Goliath, right? It's exactly this mindset. When you want to humiliate your enemy, you cut off his body parts. And that's exactly what happens here. All right? So this is kind of the ultimate punishment to Dagon, the fact that his head and hands were cut off, and it shows the power of the God of Israel. We can say that the Philistines, God talked to the Philistines in a language that they understood. All right? Because this is the culture of the Near East back then. So what did they do? They moved the ark to two other cities, two other Philistine cities. One is, okay, so from Ashdod is right here, to Gath, and from Gath to Ekron, right? So they moved the ark from one city to another, and in any place that the ark reached, it caused troubles, all right? Death, disasters, problems, all right? And you can see it was kind of a fulfillment, if you like, of an old verse from Numbers that says that when the ark sent out, Moses said, "Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." So this was kind of what happened with the ark. But what I would like to ask is two questions. One is why the Philistines believed, all right, that if they will send the ark to a different location, things will be different. If there was a disaster in Ashdod, what is the difference between Ashdod and Gath? And what is the difference between Gath and Ekron? Right? Why they moved it from one place to another? Why they thought that it will be different? And the second question, which is actually connected to the first one, is there were 5 big Philistine cities, but 2 of them are not part of the story, Gaza and Ashkelon. All right? So why the ark was not sent over there? And I think if we look at the map, we might get an answer. So we talked about the mindset of people in the ancient Near East, and one of the things that characterized the understanding of, or the mindset of people in the ancient Near East, is that God is attached to a specific territory. That's what people thought. That's what people believed in the times of the Bible. And I brought to you a quote from Kings, not about the Philistines, but just to express this concept. Pay attention. So the officials of the king of Aram advised him, their gods are gods of the hills. All right? So the God of Israel is the God of the hills. But if we will fight them on the plains, surely we will be stronger than they. All right? So it shows us kind of the mindset of people, and I feel that the Philistines had the same mindset. And that's why they brought the ark to cities. This is Ekron, all right here, and Gath right here. Pay attention, Ekron and Gath are just on the borderline between the Israeli area and the Philistine area. So the mindset of the Philistines was, let's send it away towards its place, and maybe over there it will be okay. But what they learned is that the God of Israel is not about geography, and it crosses borders, right? And it's not about a specific location, and God of Israel is everywhere, all right? The God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob is not limited to a specific location. This is what the Philistines eventually understood. All right, so we're getting into our last case study, which is about the Sea of Galilee, and what I would like to ask is 2 questions. Why did Jesus choose the Sea of Galilee as the center of his ministry, and why does the New Testament call it the Sea of Galilee, which is a name Jesus himself never knew? All right? So if someone would ask Jesus in the first century, excuse me, Jesus, where is the Sea of Galilee? Jesus would have no idea. right? Not because it's English. Even if I'll translate the Sea of Galilee into Hebrew, all right, it's the same. The name of the lake in the first century was the Lake of Tiberias. This was the name, and I know it because I have a very important source which is contemporary to the time of the Gospels, time of Jesus, and that's Josephus Flavius, which is a record of the war of the Jews against the Romans in the first century, and he talks about the Lake of Tiberias, and also Jewish rabbinical texts. It's always about the Lake of Tiberias. So why the Gospels are used? Oh, by the way, also the Gospels are using Lake of Tiberias in John 19. At the end of John, after the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus meets his disciple where? Lake of Tiberias, right? But the other Gospels are using the term Sea of Galilee. Why is that? So before that, let's take a look at the Hebrew Bible name. All right, so first century Lake of Tiberias, but the Hebrew Bible name is Kinneret. And I brought to you 4 out of 5 quotes, records of the name Kinneret. And what I would like you to pay attention to is that none of them is important. All right? None of them is significant. So it's the name of a place. Kinneret is the name of a city. And the lake, as Lake Tiberias, is named after Tiberias. Also, Kinneret is named after a city called Kinneret, which is on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Here it is. This is how it looks like. All right, this is the excavation of Kinneret. And this is the tail, the hilltop. It's just by Capernaum on the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee. And honestly, there is nothing really significant about it. The Bible talks about, the Hebrew Bible talks about list of kings. So one of them is the king of Kinneret. It's a boundary, it's a border, but nothing really significant. All right? But so being such an insignificant place, it raises the question why this place was chosen by Jesus as the place of his ministry. So I would like to share with you a few options, a few answers why an insignificant place was chosen by Jesus as the place of his ministry, as the core, as the headquarter of his ministry. So the first one is the fact that the Via Maris crosses through the Sea of Galilee. All right, we talked about the Via Maris. We understand the importance of the Via Maris, the main highway connecting, the Syria and Egypt. And everybody who wants to cross from Egypt to Syria goes through the Sea of Galilee. All right, and if you have a word to spread, if you have a message to spread, the Sea of Galilee would be a great place because you have people crossing. All right, so many people imagine the Sea of Galilee as kind of a periphery, a place which is far away. Well, not exactly, because again, it's on the highway. This is one thing. The other thing is it is a borderline of cultures. Pay attention to this really important map. It shows you the Sea of Galilee, or the land in the first century, and you can see something very clear. The Sea of Galilee serves as a border between Galilee and Decapolis. Now, what is Decapolis? Decapolis is a region. It's a union. It's a political union of 10 cities, 10 cities that had one thing in common. They had more things in common, but one important thing in common, Gentiles, all right, non-Jewish cities. And when the Romans came into the country, the Romans gave them a special status, all right, different tax, different everything. They were not under King Herod. So, very non-Jewish area. But the Galilee was definitely very Jewish. You know it because you read the Bible and you read about Jesus and the synagogues and all of that. We see it very clearly in archaeology. Those who've been with me in the Sea of Galilee, they remember the synagogue in Magdala, right? And ritual bath and synagogues. And so the Galilee was very Jewish. I'm not saying it was only Jewish, but it was primarily Jewish. And pay attention, what's the border between Decapolis and the Jewish Galilee? The Sea of Galilee, all right? And when Jesus wanted to have an interaction with Gentiles, the Sea of Galilee, and as Jesus wanted to have an interaction with the Gentiles, the Sea of Galilee would have been a great place, right? And we know it because every time, Jesus is crossing the lake, so many people think, okay, so he just crossed the lake. No, friends, when he crossed the lake, he crossed cultures. He went to the other side of the lake. The other side of a lake is not just a geographical description. Look what's going on the other side of the lake. All right, so we need to look at the map when we're reading the Bible in order to fully understand the story. In addition, it was a political border between two provinces or two regions of the Roman Empire, because the Galilee was controlled by one of King Herod's son named Antipa, while the northeast side of the lake was actually the territory of Philip. All right, so there is a political border here, and Jesus had a very complicated relationship with Herod Antipa. Herod Antipa is the one who beheaded John the Baptist. Jesus named him the fox. This is what Jesus said about him, that he is the fox. So you can see that the Sea of Galilee is a place that will allow Jesus to cross to the other side if he wants to. All right, so we have a cultural border and we have a political border. But there is something which is more theology. And this is the reason given by Matthew. When Matthew wants to explain why Jesus moved to the Sea of Galilee, he says that this is a fulfillment of a prophecy from Isaiah. Isaiah was written in the 8th century BC. And in this time, the Galilee was conquered by the Assyrians. That's why Isaiah calls it the Galilee of the nations, because what the Assyrians did is that they brought different people, different tribes, different cultures into the Galilee. They mixed up the society. Right? This is why it became the Galilee of the nations. And Isaiah, he looks at all the catastrophe, looks at the conquest of the Galilee, how the 10 tribes were kicked out from the country. And he had a prophecy. He has a prophecy. And the prophecy is that one day it will be better. One day there will be a light. Now it's a place of darkness, and the Assyrian soldiers, the Assyrian Empire took over, and they raped the women, and they killed the people, and they kicked out the people from their land. But one day the people living in the land of darkness, they will see the light. Now, what Matthew is doing here? Matthew wants us to understand that Jesus is the fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 9. That Isaiah predicted that one day the area of the Galilee will see light, and here's the light. So what does he do? He makes up a new name. He takes the word Galilee. See, the future he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea. So he takes the Galilee, he takes the word sea, and he puts it together, and he gets the Sea of Galilee. Why? To strengthen the idea that Jesus is the light which was prophesied and predicted by Isaiah. So, what can we learn from the story of the Sea of Galilee? One is that God works in places the world considered unimportant, right? Because I remind you that in the Hebrew Bible, unlike Jerusalem, unlike Bethlehem, Sea of Galilee is insignificant, right? But as we can see, God sometimes works in places that people considered as unimportant. Second one is that the good news were meant to travel, because Jesus chose a place that will allow the gospel to spread out. And the third thing is that the light can shine in dark places, even ones devastated by war, empire, and division. And I want to connect to the prayer that Father George prayed at the beginning, that I hope we will see peace soon in the Middle East, a region that needs more light, more hope, and more peace. And I'll end up with a prayer, if you don't mind. It's a prayer that was said in Hebrew, and I know it because while there are some arguments about the language of Jesus, if it was Aramaic and Hebrew, there is one thing I can be certain about. Jesus prayed in Hebrew. Right? Maybe when he talked to people, it was Aramaic. I'm not sure about that, but maybe. But when he prayed and read from the Bible, it was definitely in Hebrew, because in Judaism, like Islam, you have to use Hebrew or Arabic when you pray. Right? It doesn't matter if you don't speak Hebrew, but when you pray, you need to use Hebrew. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pray the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew. אבינו שבשמיים, יתקדש שמך, תבוא מלכותך, יעשה רצונך כמו בשמיים כן בארץ. את לחם חוקנו תן לנו היום, וסלח לנו את חובתנו, כאשר סלחנו גם אנחנו לחייבינו. ואל תביאנו לידי ניסיון, כי מחלצנו מן הרע, כי לך ממלכה והגבורה, והתפארת לעולמי עולמים. אמן. Thank you so much for having me. What a blessing. Thank you so much.
Sorry, that's really loud. I apologize. Thank you, Aviv. You have a little Q&A in you? So I think we'll take time for questions if anybody has any questions, and I know him well enough to know that it can go beyond what he presented today. He has shared with you that he has had some children since many of you saw him, and if you want to ask about his family and how things are going with his friends, his neighborhood in Israel at this time, I know you care for him and pray for him, and I think he'd be open to those questions as well. So please, if there are any questions, let's take this time and ask them.
In your first case study, you kind of explained how Israel receives its water as rain. It's my understanding Israel has some of the most sophisticated agriculture and the irrigation. And the sophisticated irrigation, do they just enhance the management of the rain they receive? Does Israel find water to add to the rain that they receive from the heavens, to that infrastructure?
First of all, you're right. Israel is doing amazing with water. I mean, the modern state of Israel. Yeah,
I'll repeat.
go ahead.
Sorry, I'll repeat the questions. That was my intent, and then I thought maybe you all heard him. The question is about the rainwater and how it is treated so that it is connecting to what he shared with us about rain from heaven and how that irrigation works. So the question was about modern day irrigation as well.
Right. So two things were developed in Israel, or Israel made it very successfully. One in the 50s and 60s was the dripping irrigation, invented by an Israeli named Simcha Blas, that's his name, and basically it changed the world. Millions, I'm not saying, I'm serious about it, millions of lives were saved in Africa because of this system. Actually, I have a friend who worked in an NGO that goes to Ethiopia to bring dripping irrigation to Ethiopia. Right? So this is something huge. And the second thing happened maybe 15 years ago, and that's desalination. Not only in Israel, but Israel took it to the next level. Today, 75% of Israel's water is from the Mediterranean. Now, friends, I don't know if you know it, but the starting point of the war in Syria was because of water. All right, we also, what was it, a few months ago, how Assad fled Syria. It all started 15 years ago, in 2011, I think, because of lack of water. All right, so there were demonstrations and unrest because there was no water. And those who've been to Jordan, they know how crucial water is in Jordan. In Israel, until 15 years ago, we were educated to save every drop and water and water. It's not a thing in Israel anymore. Not because it's not a dry land. It is a dry land, but because we're drinking from the Mediterranean.
And now Jordan gets their water from Israel.
True. It's part of the peace agreement with Jordan. We share water with Jordan. That's true.
The border that you were talking about with the swamps and the river, was that river was it like the Jordan? It wasn't deep enough to ship on?
To ship what?
Anything. I mean, was it not deep enough, not wide enough to put boats on?
So actually, there is an interesting theory.
Are you asking about the
Yarkon River.
yes. So just a question about the depth of the river that goes from the Mediterranean. He's going to pull the slide up. Just a question about the depth of that, of people being able to put vessels in the water to boat.
Okay, so it's interesting because there is a description in the Bible that the wood, the timber for the temple in Jerusalem was brought from Lebanon on rafts to Jaffa. But there is a theory that one of the nicknames of the river is the Sea of Jaffa, and that the rafts came from the Mediterranean and then inside the river all the way to Afek, and Afek is not really far from Jerusalem. So the answer to your question is yes, sometimes they did ship things along the river.
Any other questions? I think you all heard that one. How old is the newest baby girl?
10 months.
How about Christian churches and worship in Israel?
Question about Christian worship in the state of Israel.
All right, so in the state of Israel, there are basically two groups of Christians. One is the historical Christians, which are Arabs. Ethnically, they're Arabs, so they speak Arabic. They're Arabs and Christians. And this is kind of a historical Christian community. In the past, 20, 30, 40 years, you have others, or the others, so asylum seekers, refugees, people who got married with Israelis and moved to Israel, and that's actually a growing community. Also people who come to work in Israel, like many Filipinos. All right, so that's actually a growing community, while the Arab Christian community is declining, unfortunately, because immigration, political problems, so they're getting smaller. The non-Arab community is actually growing. So a lot of Filipinos, for example, we have a lot of churches of Filipinos in Israel, and so that's growing. And we have all the different denominations, like Catholics and Protestants and everything.
Do you know anything about that situation in Israel by any chance?
About what?
About Christian worship in churches in Israel?
I was talking about Israel.
I know, I just didn't know if you...
Yeah. I'm following. I'm in touch with lots of churches and Christian worship places in Israel, and thank God it's thriving. And though more and more, again, mainly of the newcomers, not like I went to see a service of African community in Tel Aviv, and many people, and it was awesome. It was really nice.
We'll go in the front first.
Why do you feel safe in Israel?
Why do I feel safe? I have no other choice. This is where I live. But I'll tell you something. Each place has its own problems, right? Like I watched the news about, crocodiles eating people in Florida, right? and wildfires in Australia, and this is scary. Sharks. We don't have sharks. We don't have gladiator, crocodiles. We have other problems, and because I was born to these troubles and problems, I'm not afraid of them. That's the story.
That's kind of like my question. When we were there with you, that's my best trip I've ever had in my time. It meant so much to me.
Thank you.
Very much. But you would travel, your wife was in Tel Aviv, and you would go back and forth. Are you still easy to do that? And what are the ages of your others?
So the question is about when we're touring in Israel, which is a small place. It's not like Texas, so you can get to and fro in a few hours. So often Aviv will be able to return home during a tour to be with his family, and then the second. So how is that working?
You can
and
see
then
how small is Israel.
Second part of the question was the names and ages of the babies.
Really? I didn't hear it. Okay. The ages and names of my kids.
The babies.
Of the babies. All right. So first of all, regarding geography, yes, as a tour guide, I traveled all over the country. But Tel Aviv is a very convenient spot because of public transportation. It's very easy. So yes, when my groups are in Jerusalem, I commute from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, and it's easy. It's like 35 minutes by train. So I do it. Names and ages. So Yuval is the oldest and is almost 5. He's like 4.5. Yuval is from Genesis. Is the father of music in Genesis. This is Yuval. And the second one is Yali, which means God gave me. And she is exactly 3. And the newest one is Kerem, which means vineyard, and she is 10 months.
I have another question. Talking about the news and the war and what we see, like I guess what I want to say is what we see and what the news presents to us, as in the bombings, the people, devastated as war
Yeah.
Is that what, I mean, I know it's bad, but I'm just saying, are we seeing, is it worse than what we're seeing on our TV?
So I think you heard this, but the question is about accuracy in reporting. Good luck.
I don't watch so much American news, so I don't know, and I think it depends which news you watch. I will say that the war is ugly. It's hell, literally hell, and I hope it will end soon. As I see it, there are two things that needs to happen in order for the war to finish. One, all the hostages, 58, need to come back home. And the other one is that Hamas should lay his weapon down, because I'm telling you, myself, I will not raise children next to them. No chance. I think there was a collective understanding. We ignored them before October 7th. Yeah, they just want some money and it's not serious. After October 7th, there was a collective understanding. We're not going to live next to them. When I say them, I mean Hamas, definitely not Palestinians or Arabs, God forbid. But this movement, which I'm not going to raise children next to them, as long as they have power, as they exist, it's not going to happen. It's not sustainable. So when these two things will happen, when the leadership will change over there and the hostages will come back, the war will over. Before that, it's a problem. It's a problem because it will happen again. So we can make a ceasefire. Nice, but then in 5 years, take my word, we'll get another October 7th. They're saying it. And as long as they have the capability to do it, they will do it. So two things needs to happen, and then the war will over, and then so much suffer will be saved.
I'll just say, since we were just there, that news is very fluid there, and we get big bites, but then there's lots of small bites, and it's very fluid. And it's so interesting because when we were there, things that were happening, we didn't have family and friends write and ask our group about it until almost 24 hours or more later after it had happened, and we were like, literally, that was yesterday. Like, it didn't just happen, we're fine, it was yesterday. So it's fast, and it's something that Aviv and everyone he's surrounded with lives with. And so it goes back to that answer of, this is where I live, this is how I grew up, and it's unfortunately it's normalized. So thank you for taking the time to answer that hard question, and thank you for the question.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Many of you might remember I used to teach at Sam Houston. I was a university professor for 20 years, and I can tell you what Aviv presented and prepared for you this evening is not easy. It does take work, it does take time, and that time away from 3 babies to get it ready to come here is time away, and then of course being here and presenting it to you. And so we would love, as a company, to ask all of you out of love, if you would like, I've put a basket on the table, and if you would just like to send Aviv back home with a love offering, no pressure at all. But sometimes a hug and a few dollars goes a long way to sustain in time of war and as we're progressing toward peace. So I put that invitation to you. It's on the table. There's also just please sign in. If you didn't get to, we won't hound you. We would just like to know who you are and where you're coming to us from. And if you did leave us your email address, we would like to add you to our newsletter that we've started this year. If you're not already receiving it, we would love to add you to the list. So that's on the table as well. Feel free to look at pamphlets and things of the places that we visit. Aviv will take time and visit with you as we enjoy some refreshments that are being offered in the kitchen. And I just want to thank you so much. Eric and I want to thank you and the church and the leadership for hosting us, and for so many of you showing here tonight with us. So thank you very much, and thank you again, Aviv.
Thank you.